know who needs to hear this, but here's 2 reasons why the Bereans are a bad example of sola scriptura. Often the Bereans are held up to be the forerunners of the Protestant idea of sola scriptura. The scriptures are the sole infallible rule of faith. And the Bereans who search scripture to verify what they're hearing about Jesus are an example of that practice. Well, here are 2 reasons why that's not the case. The first is this. The Bereans were Greek-speaking Jews, so their Old Testament scriptures was the Septuagint, which has more books in it than the current Protestant Old Testament scriptures. So if we're saying, yes, they search scripture as the sole infallible rule of faith or Christian morals and teachings, their scriptures were different than the Protestant who's arguing for sola scriptura, and that's a problem. The second is this. They weren't simply relying on sola scriptura because Paul came to them with this new idea. Here's Jesus, the Messiah. Here's a lens that Paul was putting on the scriptures the Bereans already had, and saying, look, here's how you interpret those scriptures. That's tradition, the interpretation that Paul brought to them, that apostolic authority. Say, look, here's how you interpret your scriptures. All the Bereans did was search the scriptures they had and say, yep, we understand this lens that Paul is giving us, this apostolic authority Paul is giving us, fits with the scriptures that we have. That makes sense. They weren't searching the scriptures to verify what Paul was telling them was true, that there was to be a Messiah and all these things. They knew that was going to happen. They were expecting that. What they were doing was searching the lens that Paul gave them and saying, yep, our scriptures make sense with this lens. And then they trusted not in the scriptures by themselves, but in the apostolic authority that Paul had to interpret them. They're relying on Paul's authority to interpret those scriptures and saying, yep, we believe that you have the authority. We believe that your interpretation is the right one. That is tradition or apostolic authority plus scripture, and not simply sola scriptura.